We are less than 3 months away from what may be the most consequential election in our lifetimes. It's an election where some say the very state of our democracy is on the ballot. It may also be one of the most contentious, with a series of charges and countercharges being flung back and forth between both major parties. WisACT, the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust, is a new cross-partisan network of Wisconsin residents promoting truth in politics, peaceful engagement, and support for election integrity. Joining us to share more information about WisACT are the senior co-leads. Scott McCallum served as Wisconsin's governor from 2001 to 2003, following a 14-year stint as lieutenant governor. He is the Republican co-lead. David Haynes is the Democratic co-lead. He has decades of experience in Wisconsin media and held a variety of leadership positions at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, including business editor, the opinions editor, and the Ideas Lab editor. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for being with us here on Connect MKE. Why did each of you decide to join this effort? And we'll start with you first, Governor McCallum.
So, as simple as the question may seem, it's a very good question because, and I'll share the story that I've related in the past of why. When my daughter said, "Dad, you're working all the time. Mom doesn't like you working as much as you are. Do you really want to do this?" And I said, "No, I don't. But I have to because I care so much about democracy and my kids, my grandkids, that we need to try to do what we can to sustain democracy." We've seen internationally, the international standards, how we're slipping. And we see some of our freedoms disappearing. And the only thing I can say is if we don't get involved, people don't get involved, it's the fastest way to lose a democracy.
David, what about you? What drew you to this effort?
Well, I worked 46 years as a journalist, and I retired at the end of 2022. And I was happy painting my house and doing the other odds and ends that just don't get done when you're working in journalism, as you know. But I heard about this effort. It's backed by the Carter Center. And I got intrigued by it because it seemed like a way to do something to improve a situation that I had observed over the last at least 5 or 6 years of my career, of where we just weren't talking to each other politically in the way we once had. It had really gotten to be pretty bad, in my opinion. And so I thought it was a way to help.
This is called a cross-partisan effort, right, not bipartisan.
Right.
What is the difference and why is that important, David?
So cross-partisan simply means it's Democrats and Republicans alike working together to build trust in our institutions. We don't ask anyone to check their politics at the door. Scott and I disagree on any number of things, and members of our coalition of about 250 people now statewide would disagree on issues for sure, and that's okay. Partisanship, there's nothing wrong with that. Toxic partisanship, like we often have too much of, is a problem. But what we do at WisACT is we don't focus on what we disagree about. We focus on what we can agree on, which is that we should have free and fair elections. They should be secure, and it should be free of political violence and intimidation.
We're going to talk a bit more about some of the main efforts and goals of WisACT, but first let's set the political table a little bit. How did we get to this point? I think it's kind of easy to say, oh, it's one party or it's one politician, but as you alluded to, David, it seems, Governor, that this has been brewing for a while.
And it's interesting when people say it's a problem with this candidate or it happened earlier. But populist movement, for one thing, is not unique to Wisconsin or to America. We see worldwide. And historically, I don't want to get too much into history, but historically, when there are great changes that occur, it's an uncomfort level, and people strike out against a status quo. I think you combine that with some of the vitriol by candidates, and it accelerates. I mean, if it's successful, people see this occurring, they try it, and it's a downward spiral.
Let's talk a little bit now about some of those really key efforts that you're focusing on. David, one of those efforts is promoting truth and honesty in politics and our institutions. Given what the governor just said, how do we get to that point when we're in this political climate that we're in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we think that our theory of change is that you have to build relationships. You have to build relationships across partisan lines. That takes time. But one thing we can do now with our network is begin to message to the general public through a social media campaign that we have starting this summer. And what we're basically saying is that the system is safe and secure. You can trust it. And, did you know, for example, that when you cast a ballot that you have to show your ID? Well, a lot of people probably know that, but not everyone does. And so we're going to be pushing out that kind of messaging. That's one way you can do it. And I think you can do it. I've often thought, just like you and I are sitting here, and Scott and I have sat down many times, I think you need to meet people where they are, face to face, and just listen. And so a lot of what we're doing is listening. We just completed a series of focus groups around the state in 5 communities. And Scott and I didn't say a word. We just listened to what people were saying, and we learned a lot as part of that. And that will inform what we do going forward.
Peaceful engagement is another key element that you're working on. Governor McCallum, do we still know how to do that? Do we still know how to be peaceful and have respectful discussions so we can continue to move our democracy forward?
Now, we read and we see on the macro level what is occurring, but social media and news is made by disagreement. It's not particularly made with people agreeing with each other. I will tell you, there are some things that you get really discouraged with what you see is occurring, and a sense of what is happening to our institutions and a loss of democracy. But the flip side, I found these focus groups, the listening sessions, very invigorating. We got people of all different philosophies to give their opinion and talk with each other. And we had Democrats and Republicans agreeing in all kinds of things, mostly how the process can work and should work. Doesn't mean they agree on issues. There's a great richness and diversity. That's what makes a democracy. But channeling it in the right way, people can talk civilly, is what is important. And, there's real reason for hope. And we're hoping, when you ask some of the goals, we're hoping that we can give people some of the tools to be able to counter the venom that is occurring in society, to counter things that are being said, and to lower the temperature, to lower the actual hatred we see in some cases, to get it to the point where we can disagree civilly.
Yeah, and I would add that the vast majority of the people in this state want a better politics. When you go out and talk to them, they tell you that. But they don't know what to do. And so WisACT is kind of providing a space for those people to come together. We were in a community not long ago doing a listening session, good example of what Governor McCallum's talking about, where the municipal clerk was there. She's a Democrat, and the former chair of the Republican Party in that county was there. And he said, you know what? We weren't going to run anyone against her, and so we think she's doing such a great job. She's a Democrat, remember, that we collected signatures for her. So we did see at the grassroots level some real signs of hopefulness that people can get along and can work across partisan lines.
Thanks so much. We will be back right after this break when we'll continue to look at more of the specific efforts behind WisACT. We are back with former Governor Scott McCallum and retired Journal Sentinel editor David Haynes. And we're continuing our conversation about WisACT, an effort to restore integrity, trust, and civility in our electoral process. Governor McCallum, fair, safe, secure elections. That is a key part of what you are working towards. Is it a question about whether or not there's a problem with our elections, or is it just dealing with the perception that people have?
Yeah, that's a great question because you anticipated my answer on the perception. Part of what we produced, share with people how the process works. Invite the public in, and many of these things our electoral process is very transparent. Public is invited in. Testing of the machines a week before the election. I will tell you something that really is interesting, though, as we've gone around and as we've shared what the process is with people, is generally we're finding, and more people learn, well, we trust what's going on here in Eau Claire, or we trust what's happening in La Crosse, but it's Madison where the problems are. Or it's Milwaukee, or it's Green Bay. Oh, Green Bay, we're safe here, but we worry about Eau Claire. And so people trust their own system, and they trust what's happening. And partially, I mean, you working at the polls, you get to know people, they know you. I will tell you, on election day, 1 out of 6 poll workers, election workers in the entire country are in Wisconsin. We're a very localized, people know each other type system, and people who understand the system, yes, there are going to be mistakes. We should understand there are going to be human error in some things, generally are, and they're very minor. Overall, is there fraud? We've got so many audit processes in place in the state of Wisconsin, and if somebody tried to be corrupt, it'd cost them a fortune with the number of workers we have.
Well, one of the things that it seems like you're talking about is the importance of there just being voter education about the way things work.
It's part of what we're trying to do is educate people and let them understand how transparent the process is and to participate in it.
Yeah, one thing that Governor McCallum has said repeatedly, and I completely agree with, is if you have a concern, get involved. And there are lots of ways you can get involved. You can become a poll worker. You can be a poll watcher. Certainly you should vote. You can get involved with a party if you want to and help elect a candidate. But get involved in the process. The concern I think we have is that a lot of people have been saying recently, politics, but we have to get involved. And there's that vast majority of people I mentioned earlier in this state that want a better politics. And so we're providing a space for them to have some involvement. But if it's not our group, there are lots of other groups that are doing similar work. And we would just say, become engaged.
One of the things that really seems to happen is that people tend to seek and get information from places that agree with them, right? How do we help people look for, search, and find information that might be different from their point of view?
Well, one thing we're doing, I think I mentioned earlier, a messaging campaign that we have starting this summer, and that will be focused on factual information about our electoral system. And so we're going to be doing that. On our website, we'll be providing some additional information as well. We also have on our website a whole list of groups that are doing good work in our state and beyond that people can get involved with if they want to. But there is a problem with balkanization of the media. We've seen it happening now for the past 10 or 15, 20 years. And so people are isolated in a bunch of different ways. They're isolated geographically. We tend to live next to one another with whom we agree politically. We tend to look at media that agrees with our point of view. And so we do urge people to try other media. We issued a challenge at our last monthly meeting to everyone there. Talk to someone this week with whom you may disagree politically. And more than half the people volunteered to do that, which I thought was great.
It's a good place for us to start. But that really brings us perhaps back to, Governor, this cross a partisan collaboration. Do we still remember how to do that here in Wisconsin? Do we still remember how to work together even though we might disagree on some political points of view?
We remember, but we don't want it to become a distant memory. It's I think it is possible. And that's what, as we mentioned earlier, we want to look for the things that we can agree on, where there's commonality, and differ on issues. Now, I will say, as an organization, we've made it very clear we're not getting involved in political issues. We're the platform where people can agree. But we've kind of teased in that, well, we sure all agree that the Bears, I don't want to use the language out here, but the Bears still aren't very good, and that the Packers are. And we can have fun and agree and be friends that way. We can carry that over. We can agree on a number of things, and what we're trying to say to people is, let's agree that democracy and civility, and when we pitch the getting involved, the sure way of losing a democracy is if people give up on it or don't get involved. Then it's all over with. A democracy works only when people are involved and in many cases need to educate themselves.
Yeah, I think Scott's absolutely right about that. I think the other thing that we have to think about is, I think back to when I was a kid growing up, northern Indiana, in a rural area. My dad was a Republican, but a lot of his friends were not. They were Democrats. But they all had a lot in common. They were baseball fans, they were farmers, some of them worked in factories, and they would talk politics and, they'd have a beer or whatever, but that wasn't the only thing that identified them. And so I think now sometimes we're so overly identified with our partisanship. We need to look for things like Scott was saying, hey, we still own the Bears, right? So
we do.
We need to look for those things that we can identify with that are more broader and sort of richer than just our politics.
There's a lot at stake in this election in many different ways. What happens if this doesn't work? What happens if WisACT doesn't get us to the point that we need to be? What's next?
If you're asking the larger picture, what happens if there is violence and if people don't trust the system? Again, we've started down that. We need to reverse the cycle and have people get involved and counter, because it becomes very easy, as we have seen. Once somebody does it, the other side says they've done it, so we get to do it, but we'll do it better. And it's the armament of the parties is intensifying, and we begin to accept things that we ought not accept. I mean, a person putting a bullseye target on the opponent this last race around. Things like that should not be acceptable. And we need the public to speak out that this is not the way we work in our society.
So I think there is a risk here in this election and in the weeks and days after it, for sure. But the hopeful news is that there are lots of good people in the state that don't want that. We've seen it as we've gone around the state. And there are lots of groups and people, individuals, standing up to say no. There's a big constituency in this state, 90% or more, who don't want that kind of politics and don't want that kind of behavior. And, we're a state that's always been about good government and about things running well. And I think we can still be that state. So I'm pretty hopeful, actually. I think we're in better shape than maybe we realize, but there's still work to do for sure.
David Haynes, Governor Scott McCallum, thank you both so much for the work that you're doing. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
If I could add one other thing before we close.
Sure.
Everybody can get involved. Go to WisACT.org, WISACT.org. There's a membership thing. You can go online to get a petition and circulate it in your neighborhood for people who want to stand up and are willing to stand up publicly for democracy.
Thank you so much for adding that. We're back right after this short break.